Allora, io
Good morning. I think we should have a start. Here we are in Brussels, weekday morning, and in fact, you can actually feel all of the impact of mobility issues in Brussels on a weekday morning, and we can't always be here bang on time, even if we would like to be. I am Daniele Aiuto, and I'm a member of the European Parliament and the Transport Committee. And we are here this morning with CS Mare Foundation. And it was together with them that I had the great honor to organize this important event for you. I think it's extremely important indeed that whilst we are working on something in the Transport Committee, it is good to make contact directly with those stakeholders who will be directly affected by what we are working on. So companies, individuals, those working in the field. So not just those meetings that we have at the time that we are working on the specific directive. For example, what I'm doing as a rapporteur, as the other colleagues do when they're working on reports. We always try to meet with stakeholders, companies, associations, etc., to really discuss the nitty-gritty of specific issues. But we do like to have an overarching openness to the entire world of business in the sector to understand precisely what your main issues are, to get a better feel for that. That is at least what we're aiming at with an event like this. Now, you'll understand very well that we set the title of this conference, and we called it Destination Europe on the Move. Why did we give it this title? Basically, we want to be able to addressing mobility in all of its aspects. Now, what are our objectives? We all have, I think, the same objective, really. These are objectives that reach far beyond the Transport Committee. We're trying to reduce traffic flows, road accidents, emissions, not just CO2 emissions, but other emissions, pollution, congestion, but not that just this. We're also aiming at bringing real benefits to the companies so that we're cutting red tape, reducing costs for European businesses, thereby creating jobs. This is something, obviously, that we are very much focused on, and that must be factored into what we're doing. Now, these are hard objectives to meet, especially considering the complex issue, mobility. More than 11 million European citizens will be affected in terms of the jobs that exist or will be created. So 11 million people working in the mobility sphere, small and medium-sized enterprises, big conglomerates that are also working in the area of logistics. More than ever, all of these entities have great challenges to meet. In the area of technology, of course, that we've looked at it in all of the mobility package and throughout, but there are other types of challenges. For example, economic sustainability of the type of investment that we plan to make. And the other members of the panel will have a chance to look at some of the specific investments that are going to be made by the European Commission through CEF, the Connecting Europe facility this investment will be made over the course of upcoming decades. And then we have the social challenges. We'll also be looking more in depth at that this morning when we look at the first mobility package that has some elements that are of great importance, including improving the work life of road transport, those working in road transport. Now, this has been stalled somewhat. I'm not sure if you have seen what has been taking place in terms of the procedure surrounding the first package. In committee, we worked on it, and we were able to pass a text. There was a very thin majority there, and it didn't go through plenary. So unfortunately, the text did not get through the plenary vote. Then there were a few months in which we weren't sure what was going to happen. We thought that perhaps the three files were actually going to be put to the side. shelved for a while and then bring them back out in the upcoming and new legislative period. But then, thanks to the Commissioner Bulc specifically, there was a real impetus, and all of the members of the committee were called back to get involved and to come up with a result before the end of this legislative period. So we started organizing meetings. We have been doing that, and we're looking for some sort of a resolution to this issue. Well, I can't say that I'm optimistic at this point, because I see that some of the political groups, and this across the board, not just with one political group in particular, but an overarching feeling within the political groups that we won't come to some sort of a resolution on this issue by the end of the legislative period. Now, I hope that I am wrong on this, but my inkling is that the way things are going right now, it will be difficult to be able to conclude the file by the end of the legislative period. But we'll see. Anything's possible. Now, as you know, the first package looks at everything related to the new cabotage rules, as well as the posted workers for drivers and rest times. It seems that on some aspects we have been able to come to an agreement, but there is a huge divide and divergence that exists on other issues. And often this is a divergence that exists across Europe, actually, when it comes to working conditions for the people working in this particular field. And this divergence exists amongst the member states. I can give you a few examples. Countries from the east, member states from the east of the European Union, and others in Italy, for example, those working in road transport, and that are very concerned about unfair competition. Unfair competition that has various aspects that impact the work life of those who are working in road transport. That is absolutely unacceptable. Then there is quite a bit of will to put an end to a situation of those types of working conditions that are essentially subjection, where people living in working in almost slave-like conditions. So on the one hand, there are people who are really looking to find a solution. There's a common interest to do so, and yet at the same time, it doesn't seem that we have what we need to actually find that solution. That is what we have seen, but it doesn't seem that we have been able to strike that balance that we need to find a solution. Now, our position has been, and we think it would help a lot, if we could clarify the rules on cabotage. What are the main issues related to cabotage? Well, one is controls, because the rules essentially already existed. And the rules did raise some problems in terms of competition, and that there was a lack of following of the rules, and mainly that came down to controls. So I made a proposal to try to get beyond this. There was a pilot project that was put into place along with the Commission study, and it looked at the use of GNSS satellite systems to carry out the checks on those heavyweight vehicles. Now, this was assessed as a not only feasible solution, but a very good one at that there would be savings for the member states if this GNSS system were to be used for these controls, and yet the system will not actually be integrated into the solution, without the controls, there will be this gray area where basically anything can take place and anything goes. So I wanted, by way of these remarks, to give you an overarching view of what is taking place in terms of the first package and what is happening there. Now, I personally I still am the rapporteur on two very important files. The first is on the common rules for certain types of combined transport of goods between member states. Now, this was already voted on in the Transport Committee. and the green light has been given for negotiations with the Council. When I picked up this file, I was really pleased because what I realized was that my opinion was an important tool to be used towards really shifting to rail, making that huge leap. We've been talking about it, and this would be a concrete move forward. And then we looked at what the Commission had done in the past. By virtue of the assessment of what took place in the past, what we saw was that not much had been done by the Commission to actually make that shift to rail, or by using this combined transport of goods. In fact, the numbers there are very low indeed. So by updating the directive, the Commission was hoping to really give that strong impetus towards the move to combined transport of goods. So that would move from road to rail. Because everything is interlinked, actually. Quality of infrastructure is at risk if it has far too much traffic. So if there's too much traffic, then we have to lighten the traffic. In order to lighten the traffic, you obviously have to have that shift from road to rail. Everything is interlinked indeed. When it comes to the transport of goods on rail, that also means that we will be able to have a positive impact on congestion of the road infrastructure. It will lower pollution. It will mean that we can also fight climate change and reduce the number of road accidents. So it all comes together, really, in that move towards the objectives that not only the European Commission has set for itself, but that we have as well. Perhaps that you could bring up the slides for the combined transport of goods.
Ecco qua. Allora.
There they are, very good.
Abbiamo avuto appunto quello che vi dicevo.
Now, as I said previously, in the past, the Commission really made a move to try to reduce emission levels, but not only, road accidents as well. Unfortunately, we know that the transport of goods has been concentrated much more on the road. And we have reason to believe that it is going to increase exponentially, the 80% by 2050. Well, 80% of transport of goods by 2050 will be on the road unless we do something else to make sure that that actually stops. We have to make sure that that doesn't take place, that we don't get to that 80% mark. Therefore, we need to send a very strong signal indeed. That's precisely what has been done with the work that is currently been undertaken on the directive. Moving on to the next slide. Combined transport is of great importance for several reasons. Well, one, you can reduce congestion on the road infrastructure. With an improvement of the congestion conditions that currently exist in the port terminals. Also, it focuses on an improvement on the rail transport, where it runs into certain areas where it's hard for the rail system to actually get through. So if that were to happen, that would actually assist in the transport of goods. And also, we're looking to make intermodal transport more fluid amongst the various ports within the European Union. Which additional proposals were made in the directive as proposed by the European Commission? And what are the proposals that I looked at in my report? Moving forward on the slides. What you can see here is there are a number of different new elements that have been integrated into the text that was approved. The first one is the fact that the scope has been broadened. That's the main and first point. What we were trying to do really here was broaden the scope as much as possible. Unfortunately, the previous directives had really focused on the TEN-T networks. So all of the investment, all of the effort focused mainly on those networks. By doing that, some of the areas of the continent were penalized. If new directives do not broaden, therefore, the scope, clearly we're never going to be able to meet the results or to obtain the results that we would like to obtain. Another important point was clarifying the definition of the distance. So from the starting point and the end point of the entire combined road transport, transport. So this was set at 150 kilometers from start to end. And obviously, there was another thing that was necessary, and this is a part of what the European Parliament is really focused on. Well, there was a setting of exemptions. Why? Because there are some member states that have more and better performing terminals, and that are farther than 150 kilometers, or because of the geographical situation of the country, it would be necessary to establish a longer distance or a shorter distance. For example, with 150 kilometers, you could get across the entire country without having to shift to rail at any point because of the small size of the member state. Or there are other characteristics, for example, the fact that there were no terminals that were located on one side or the other side of the 150 kilometer mark, for example, in the south of Italy. So these exemptions needed to be integrated into the text to make it possible to protect all of this and to protect the small states, for example, to prevent a situation in which these small member states wouldn't be able to set a distance mark that was lower than 150 kilometers if needed for that member state. Then we talked about technological innovation. In the directive, there was a mandatory acceptance of the electronic document that was established. As a rapporteur, I was much more ambitious in my approach. It was not just a mandatory acceptance of the electronic document, but rather a full shift to digitization of documents. But we do know that for companies, this would pose an enormous problem. Hence the decision to just establish that there would be a possibility of accepting the e-document. I am sure that the technology is going to move much faster than we as politicians will be able to move. And so clearly I think that we will be shifting to a paperless reality very quickly. And so we don't have to set necessary deadlines. It's going to happen very naturally. We set this possibility in the document. And then it was made mandatory for member states to establish the infrastructure for the terminal that will be needed. Now, there are terminals that function extremely well. And as they expand, they are going to be even more important in terms of the effect that they had. And then, of course, we always have a keen eye on in our member state countries. And I know that, for example, in my country, there can be a lack of terminals, and so there's a need for public investment in the terminals. But how? Much like was done in the past. We don't need a cathedral in the middle of the desert. We need to have the infrastructure that already exists, or something that would be established but will be useful in the intermodal connection. So linking up all of those different types of transport and mobility. And the last point that was extremely important, and for Italy is very important. When it comes to state aid, under 35%, there would be no need to notify the Commission. if it's under 35%. We know that sometimes administration or national administration forgets to send that net notification to the European Commission, and then there might be a small hiccup with an investment because this obligation to notify hasn't been met. So with this 35% that was set, and the under 35% mark meant that there would be a little bit more flexibility here for the member states. And for Italy, in my opinion, or in our opinion, is a point that will bring a great benefit. When it comes to the state of this directive, now, it was voted on in the Transport Committee in July, and we got the green light as of September in the plenary to begin negotiation with the Council. So now the real issues lie with the Council. Had the Council been in line with the Parliament's position, well, then the Council would have been keen to begin negotiations with the Parliament immediately, one would think. I remember when the Austrian Transport Minister came to the TRAN Committee at the end of September, if I'm not mistaken.
So, tra le priorità del semestre austriaco,
the minister stated that one of the priorities was defining combined transport by the end of the presidency. This was considered a priority. Therefore, I would have thought that the Austrian presidency would have started trialogue immediately. Yet, the presidency came up with its own proposal on this directive that diverges from what we have. So we do not know yet when the negotiations will begin. My hope is that they will get underway as quickly as possible, because we will need a little bit of time to be able to compare the Parliament's position to the Council's position and find some convergence, because they do diverge at this point quite a bit. So probably we'll have to wait till the next rotating presidency comes in to start that. The next file that I wanted to just go through with you, and that's currently underway in the Transport Committee, is the directive on safety of road infrastructure. Now you can see that the image up here is one that comes to us from July, prior to what took place in August. Now the text did not provide for anything to take place on infrastructure, but rather just what was happening in terms of road markings and road signs, so everything on the surface. Technological interactions with the new types of signs and markings. So it was really focused on that. Now I just looked at the text, and I thought back to what took place in August. And based on what took place in August, I thought that my approach needed to focus on integrating some of the things that the Commission hadn't initially focused on. So integrated some aspects that are related to maintenance and the monitoring of the infrastructure by the states. Now, the Commission's representative had put the word infrastructure in the report, and as an architect, which I am, infrastructure relates to everything structural. And so is very much part and parcel with the quality of the safety of everything that is being used when one uses roads. So I integrated all of these aspects into my report. Through my report, I added things to the Commission's proposal based on the fact that that everything was focusing on a human error in terms of accidents. And so it was really focused on improving road markings and road signs, as well as technology of the actual means being used, the technology that was going to be used for the markings and the signs. All of that remains in the proposal, but in my opinion, that was not enough. Therefore, we looked at these other aspects and tried to integrate them into the text. Lest we forget, the idea to revise this directive was based on this idea of Vision Zero. By 2015, there should be no road fatalities. This is an absolutely noble objective. It will be very difficult to meet. It might even be impossible to meet, but we should try. And by trying, that means that we have to find a way to broaden the scope of this directive. And by expanding and broadening the scope of the directive, well, that hits at the hard core of what we are really doing in the Transport Committee here at the European Parliament. The previous directive also focused just on the 10T networks. What we would like to do is to expand that to the highway routes that were not a part of the 10T network, and to add them also to urban areas. Why? Because 10T networks are just basically it's on 10T networks where only 8% of road accidents take place. So if we really want to get to Vision Zero, we'll never be able to make that mark if we don't broaden the scope of this to those other areas. Because I can't just look at improving the security on that area where only 80% of accidents actually take place. How are we going to be able to access those other areas where the accidents are taking place? So clearly we're going to have to broaden the scope. There's no choice if we want to get to that Vision Zero. Here are the main points that we have added to the report. Horizontal, vertical road markings and signs. Well, this was already in the Commission's proposal. And protecting vulnerable users, so cyclists. So clearly, if we're going to just focus on 10T, we're not going to be able to access the cyclists because they're not going to be using 10T. Now, if I were to broaden the scope to urban areas in the main cities, for example, then there's a good reason to believe that we would actually be able to have an impact on these vulnerable users. Then structural services. This is one of the main things that are new that I added to the text. It means that we would monitor the performance of the infrastructure with the use of sensors, monitoring that, using satellite systems for the purposes of this surveillance and monitoring. All of the technology that we have available to us today must be used to keep all of the infrastructure under control. And who should be in charge of that control? Well, a third party entity should be in charge of that. Moving on. Now we talked about the extending of the directive, and this goes through that again. Later we'll be able to look at I'll look at that third party entity later. Moving on to the next slide. Basically, we already said all of this. Everything related to monitoring the road tunnels and not just the highway roads themselves, and when it comes to the quality of the signs and markings. So this must be horizontal and vertical, that is visible in all conditions. So not just during the day and at night, but also when meteorological conditions are more difficult. Now that is possible, but of course there's a cost issue. But we have to understand that safety has a cost. In buildings, for example, there's a cost related to safety. We all know that there's a cost for safety, but nobody can deny that or pretend like that it doesn't need to be, that cost doesn't need to be made. And cost cutting has very pernicious consequences. So we need to do everything that we possibly can, and we know that the Commission is trying to do that. The right investment needs to be made to ensure that this happens. When it comes to the broadening of the scope. This would also apply to the use of the funds. If I'm a member state or I'm a regional administration, for example, in Italy, the regions sometimes use structural funds. Now, if they're working on infrastructure using European funds, well, then they obviously, everything has to be in line with the European directive, and that is included in the directive. Because it is clear that if you cannot carry out infrastructure with European funds, we won't be able to ensure the safety levels that are needed. So we have a lot of ambitions here, of course. I hope that we will be able to get the results, but we must keep in mind, of course, that the main objective is safety. The member states are going to have to make great efforts, of course. The local and regional authorities will need to be involved and make that effort. But we know that it will produce results. By making investments, we're going to be moving the economy forward and producing positive effects. So it shouldn't just be seen as something that would be limiting things or adding an additional burden of some sort. Moving forward, so protecting vulnerable road users, obviously that would be pedestrians and cyclists. So the next slide, here are the amendments that I have added to the report that will have to be voted on, of course, and we'll see what comes out of the vote. The first comes to the elements for the controlling and monitoring and the use of satellites, therefore, with the use of sensors. There's an amendment on that. And then the third-party entity that would verify that maintenance has been carried out, that the safety level of that specific piece of infrastructure has stayed stable over the course of years, at least. Now, we know that there's usually someone who owns the infrastructure, and then at times there is a manager that is in charge of managing the infrastructure, so two separate bodies, if you will. So the idea is that we would take the responsibility for verifying the maintenance level that would be given to a third entity. So it's neither the owner nor the manager, because obviously there would be interests in the various bodies, and then things don't take place as they should, like we saw what happened in August. So the idea would be that we would get around that. So there would be the managing on the one hand of various types of infrastructure. That's a part of the debate that it will take place in the committee, and that has to be discussed. But clearly, the major step forward is going to be made when we determine who is going to actually be able to sign off on whether or not the maintenance of that infrastructure has been kept up to the level that it should be. So neither the owner nor the manager, because clearly that would take out the aspect of the actual monetary aspects that would be involved. So that was the last slide. When it comes to the text, this evening I will have the shadow meeting with the other political groups on the text and what was proposed. If there are no real problems, we'll be voting on it next week in committee. Otherwise, we will see what takes place. If we had to delay the vote, that would basically just mean one thing, that we won't be able to get this through by the end of the legislative period. Essentially, that's what will be the conclusion. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'd like to give the floor to the moderator.
Grazie, onorevole, per questo.
Thank you very much. That was a great summing up, and I think you've given us plenty to consider. We've seen what the key issues are, and it's very useful. I apologize for being late. I was tied up with President Tajani, but he asked me to extend his thanks, and he appreciates this initiative. And President Tajani in the past was the commissioner in charge of infrastructure and transport. So he appreciates this and is keeping close tabs on the work being done in the transport committee. And wishes you, Daniela, all the best for the forthcoming deliberations. So, without further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Alberto Mazzola, the Vice President of the Gruppo di Iniziativa Italiana, the GII. Thank you, and thank you very much, Ms. Aiuto, for your help in hosting this event. We have been working jointly on this for a number of months now to pull this off. So the GII was one of the backers of this, and I'd just like to tell you who we are. So this is an organization that was founded in 1995. It was Mr. Correas who had been the ambassador in New York. There they'd set up something equivalent, having all of the representatives of Italian institutions, companies, etc., who were there in New York, have them get together into such an initiative group. And so in '95, I was in Brussels for the first time as well. And basically what we do is bring all the big and small companies that are present in Brussels together, all of the Italians who are working in other companies. We've got banks, businesses with a strong international projection, institutions representing the research and university world, as well as the regions, autonomous provinces, and the Italian chambers of commerce. So every year we come up with a number of initiatives, and it's a matter of seeing what the feelings are of the key managers, those in charge of finance, and to see what the economic outlooks are. So there's a lot of coordinating of activity. We talk about things to be done as regards Italian companies in Brussels. So we foster economic exchange trade. We have some retired diplomats who are very active. We're involved with Confindustria and the Belgian equivalents, and we host events such as this one. And often we have closed-door get-togethers with commissioners, presidents of the commission, and we get together with the Italian members in the parliament and in other European institutions on an informal basis. Recently, we had a get-together with Tajani, with Mr. Timmermans, the Vice President of the Commission, and at present I'm the Vice President, and I'm representing the GII, and there's just one point. Well, when it comes to the mobility package, there's the three of them, 1, 2, 3, and they affect other sectors, other transport sectors in particular. And as said, we've seen there's some difficulties when it comes to package 1 that seems to be moving forward. And then we also have Ms. Verkunen here, who worked on the CEF. And of course, when it comes to this proposed increase of the budget, that's something we very much appreciate for the transport sector. That's something very important. And in particular, when it comes to the requirements, I mean, there's still a gap when it comes to the 30 billion for 10 years. It's only a small part of the actual needs. So this European plan is most useful to see to it that there is funding nationally, and that's something to bear in mind. So they do have considerable impact. Then something from the railways sector. For a number of years now, we've been working on better coordination systems, and since 1995 we've been working on these in the past 23 years now, and what we've covered is less than 10% of the European network. So at this rate, to upgrade the whole system, it'll take us 200 years. So it's not quite up to speed. So we've been pushing to see that at least some 15 billion of not just public, but also private money could be put into a joint venture. And that goes for ETMS, it goes for CESAR, and probably also for road transport as well. In our case, there's a real need to get the technology going. And I'd like to hear what you have to say on this. Now, when it comes to the interoperability of toll systems, we've contributed giving some input to the rapporteur, and it's very important when it comes to the Eurovignette directive. So there's tolls, there's also the railway sector, there's a need for covering the external costs and means to reduce them, pollution, congestion, etc. So we can see at the Brenner what the possibilities and requirements are. And this directive, when it comes to the one on interoperability and vignette, should enable us to have more funding. Now, when it comes to the latest developments, we've seen that the Parliament has tried to liberalize the railway sector. I think that Korea and Italy are the only countries that actually have competition in the high-speed sector, and it's been quite successful. When it comes to the frequency of the trains in Italy, it's unmatched in Europe. And when I talk to French or German colleagues, we see that when it comes to Rome, Florence, we have 4 times more trains running between those than that they have in their countries. So there's one every 10 minutes practically. So when it comes to our prices, they're the lowest in Europe. So a lot less than you pay in Germany or France or in Belgium. And the opening up of the railway market was a big success, and now we're looking to see how we can improve things in punctuality. That's also due to the high frequencies. So the rector has been focusing on that the infrastructure can be best maintained by working jointly in close coordination. Now, when it comes to combined transport, that's the last point. Of course, we're very much in favor of what Ms. Aiuto has outlined on the 35%. I think from the Zone Mare as well as us have the good and the bad consequences of that 35%. That means that we have these opt-outs, as it were, that with these limits, we don't have to notify to the Commission. So when you look at the red tape this can generate, the companies sometimes get money 2 or 3 years after the fact. So I know there's some resistance on the part of the European Commission. We'll perhaps hear on that score from Mr. Versini, but I'd like to leave it at that. And I'd like to thank all the Italian members of the Transport Committee. And, well, not just them, but we've been in close touch with Sassoli, Salini, Aiuto, Vizzini, and other members in connection with the environment and other committees. So we very much appreciate the work that you're doing. So those are the points I wanted to run through with you on behalf of the many enterprises we represent. Thank you.
Grazie Alberto.
Thank you, Alberto. Well, I think you already suggested a subject that Frederic Versini might address, the deputy head of the unit of DG Move in charge of infrastructure. Frederic speaks excellent Italian. He's bilingual. And his last name suggests that there may be a bit of Italian in him. So he's going to tell us more about these three mobility packages, and in particular the third that was adopted in mid-May. And then the main challenge is digitalization as well, to incorporate that in the infrastructure. And the CEF, the Connecting Europe facility, is something else we'd like to hear more about, because that too was a package which over time expanded and was beefed up. So, Frederic.
Grazie.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Before beginning, I'd like to thank Ms. Aiuto for her invitation today to the Commission. Thank you for your commitment on this file. It's very important to move mobility forward in Europe. And thanks to the CS Mare Foundation and the Gruppo di Iniziativa Italiana for this get-together. Well, maybe I might just prefer switching languages at this point. It's easier for me to give my presentation in English. I'd hate to speak less than perfect Italian.
Quindi inizierò in inglese, farò una presentazione.
So I'm going to give you a short presentation in English because a lot has already been said, and maybe that way we'll have time for a dialogue.
Let me turn to English, please, and I will present you a few slides also on my side. First of all, this was said, but I think it is always useful to repeat it, that transport as such and mobility play a central role in our daily lives and in the lives of the EU citizens and in the life of the EU companies. And most of you can realize this in your everyday business. And that's the reason why we take this sector very seriously. 11 million people employed in Europe, that was already said. This accounts for 5% of the EU GDP. And we know that, for instance, congestion in transport can represent about 1% of the EU GDP. So that's very important to address this. But transport is also a sector that needs to modernize, and to modernize in order to tackle a few challenges. There were mentioned as well the CO2 emission objective. We know that transport emissions account for a quarter of the total EU emissions. And our global objectives in Europe, in accordance with the Paris Agreement, is to reduce by 40%. And we know that there are synergies that can be found also if we address a certain number of issues. As you will see, as a result of the transport, the Commission proposal in the mobility packages, for instance, a reduction of the average of new cars emission about 30% would be necessary in order to address those challenges. But there are other challenges that we need to address. The one from air pollution, maybe sometimes we don't say it enough, is also responsible for the death, the premature death, of 400,000 people per year. So that's considerable, and that's really a loss from all points of view. And road accidents, we have above 25,000 fatalities. These are the figures from 2017, and therefore the Vision Zero that was presented by Onorevole Aiuto is so important. It is challenging, but this is a challenge that we absolutely need to take. So all these should be also accompanied by a real intention for Europe to stay ahead of the curve with the new technologies. And the fact that transport is not only something that serves the whole economy, but as such is also a sector which has a global leadership in Europe. Many companies, and some are represented here, and we just had the illustration of the successes of high-speed rail in Italy. I mean, these are technology that we need to promote, expand, and for which we can preserve a certain leadership in Europe. In order to do that, I wanted to present to you the vision that Commissioner Bulc has been developing and presenting in all type of fora when she presents her initiative and her action in the field of transport and mobility, which is based on these four pillars that are decarbonization, digitalization of transport, investment, and people. That was the previous slide. And this is really the vision that we intend to develop with the three mobility packages. So just for the summary, there were three packages, two presented in 2017 and one in spring this year, all of them with different proposals, initiatives. We have here at the table some rapporteurs of very important pieces of legislation. This is not up to me now to comment on each and every one and the direction that they are taking, but rather to present the overall coherence of these. So if we look at the first mobility package, there is a very strong accent put on the market opening and development of the road sector. The second mobility package took a very strong, gave a very strong impetus to the decarbonization of transport. And now let me maybe be a little bit more detailed on the third mobility package, that is the most recent one, which has basically three main components. The first one relates to safe mobility, with very strong ambition on road safety in particular, and for which a major component is precisely the directive that Mrs. Aiuto is rapporteur of, and which we hope could be brought to a positive outcome as soon as possible. And the second pillar is the clean and sustainable mobility, with for the first time CO2 reduction targets that are set also for heavy-duty vehicles, which is unique, I think, and very positive development. And the third one, because we look very much at the future, is trying to pave the way to what will be future mobility patterns in terms of connected and automated mobility. This is an area that is extremely challenging from a number of aspects, and for which Europe needs to anticipate and make sure that the necessary requirements in terms of interoperability, in terms of safety, in terms of protection of data, and so on, are included. So that's the logic of the three packages. I would like to, if you allow me, present a little also on what we are trying to do in terms of investment and infrastructure in order to accompany that process. And first, by mentioning that in the third mobility package, there was also a proposal on streamlining measures for advancing the realization of the TEN-T. We spoke about the Trans-European Network this morning earlier on. I think one, and this helps also responding to the question that was put to me, we acknowledge, unfortunately, that there is probably too much delay in the realization of our plan, our shared plan, which was adopted by both the Parliament and the Council back in 2013, which is to realize the TEN-T network. The TEN-T network is not an objective for the sake of having an overall map at European level. This is the reality of all the citizens and the companies which need to operate on the internal market. And when you need to operate on the internal market, you need to have proper connections and proper infrastructure. The other thing is that the TEN-T network is an enabler for the change of mobility patterns. We know that we have a goal in terms of modal shift, that we want to shift more goods from the road to the rail, or from the road to inland waterways. And in order to do that, we need to provide the necessary infrastructure to do that. Otherwise, operators will not be able to propose those solutions. So that's the reason why there is, as part of the Mobility Package 3, a proposal for regulation that is a simplification measure, which is to better coordinate the processes that administrations apply in order to facilitate the realization of those investments and those infrastructure projects. This is about reducing administrative burden, reducing delays, and ultimately reducing the cost. And the cost for what? The cost of, like, the taxpayer exposure, the reduction of what the development of the Trans-European network cost ultimately to EU citizens themselves. Next, please. The proposal also includes certain elements that are related to the way infrastructure projects are implemented, notably in a cross-border context. This concerns cross-border public procurement. And there are also, in this piece of legislation, an incentive to facilitate the process as regards state aid. And that was also mentioned in the intervention of Mrs. Aiuto this morning. State aid control is very important, but we need to make sure that this is also a process that is well suited for operators. And in addition to this simplification or facilitation proposal, there was also a call for proposal for the EU to continue supporting projects in order to facilitate these transitions toward smart and sustainable mobility. So in that context, 450 million euro were put on the table. The call is now closed. It was closed on the 24th of October, and the projects which have been submitted are currently being examined and will be announced in the course of the spring 2019, probably in April 2019, and precisely focused on those priorities: ERTMS and rail interoperability, because we know that this is crucial to unlock the potential of rail. Safe and secure infrastructure, innovation and new technology, precisely to contribute to the objective that you are pursuing with the directive. And 100 million for new tech like ITS, multimodal logistics, in order, again, to enable the development. And I think that towards an audience with the foundation CS Mare, this is something that can speak directly to you. Just for the record, Italy as a country is one of the main beneficiaries of this policy. The Connecting Europe facility supports 59 projects in Italy, and it's about 1.5 billion of euros of grants that are invested by the European Union in Italy in order to support about 4 billion euros of investment. This is considerable. This corresponds also to the needs that Italy have in order also to access the internal market, and notably also to cross the natural barriers that exist between Italy and the rest of the continent, and in particular the mountainous regions. I don't want to be too long, and I don't want also to jump too much on the topic that probably my neighbor is also going to address. Just maybe to show you, and that's the next slide, what we are putting on the table and which is currently being discussed in order to prepare the next EU long-term budget, which is the Connecting Europe facility for the period 2021-2027. The Connecting Europe facility is growing in terms of scope as well, but we keep it still in the singular because it remains a single instrument. A single instrument that will be that will continue to apply with its efficient trademark, which is also, to a large extent, central management combined with a very efficient agency that is called INEA, and implemented on the basis of competitive call for proposals. So the general objectives are very related and connected to everything I have just mentioned to you in introduction. And in terms of budget, indeed, we, as Commission, have put forward a proposal that is slightly above 30 billion euros. We are naturally glad to see that this is supported and even expanded by the European Parliament. In terms of split, that would be above 12 billion euro for the general envelope, 11 billion euros for the cohesion envelope, and the novelty, which is 6.5 billion euro for military mobility. And I will not go into the details of the next slide, but just for you to keep an eye on how this money is according to the Commission proposal. This may not be the case in the end after the the ordinary legislative procedure, but the way the Commission designed its proposals in order to make sure that the EU budget is going to be targeted to those very important priorities, and in particular, the one that we absolutely need to take action to promote smart and sustainable mobility in Europe. And for these, we also need the adoption of the 3 mobility packages. Thank you very much.
Grazie Frédéric, soprattutto
thank you, Frédéric. It was a very good focus when you mentioned Italy and the state of implementation of TEN-T in Italy. And now, given the work you're doing at the Commission, that was very interesting. But now let's hear from Rapporteur Virkkunen, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for inviting me to this important event. I think this is very, of course, crucial time now because the current parliament, we are trying to finalize all the negotiations on this parliamentary term, but already we are, of course, planning also the future. So I think all the stakeholders and all the political parties are now very active because we are also planning the next Commission's working program, what kind of things should be included there. And then, of course, we are here discussing already on the multi-annual financial framework and what kind of priorities and rules we should have there. And I have been working in the Industry, Energy and Research Committee and then in Transport Committee during the last years. And I think these both committees are, of course, very important for our jobs and growth in Europe. And we can say that in the both committees, I think the certain important areas to where we have been focusing, they have been the digitalization of Europe and then the decarbonization of Europe. So I think in the both sides, in the industry and in transport side, this has been the main objectives and really we can say the mega trends all the time when we are planning the new legislation or new funding mechanism. It's always, nearly always, it's something about digitalization and modernization of our industry and transport, or then it's decarbonization. And often these are going hand in hand because, as we know, digitalization is playing an important role also if we want to decarbonize our economy, because we can do many things much more efficient way if we are using the possibilities of digitalization. Now we know that in the transport sector we are speaking a lot about the new fuels and electrification of transport, but we know that it's also playing a very big role that how we are planning the whole infrastructure, how effective logistics we are having, how much we can use all kind of automatization and digitalization when we are planning the whole transport system. And also we have interesting innovations there going on, like for example in my home country, I'm from Finland, myself from the north, so for example now we are testing platooning in the freight transport, so it means that there's only driver in the first truck and then two other trucks, there's autonomous driving and they are following the first truck on the road. So that kind of automatization is also going on in freight transport, and it means that we can work more efficient way in the future. But of course this all needs that we have to have very good infrastructure and connections in Europe. And my neighbor was already telling about the Commission's proposal about the Connecting Europe facility, and I'm one of the rapporteurs on this file. So we have been working together, Energy and Industry Committee and then in Transport Committee, because Connecting Europe facility, it's that kind of funding program which is funding energy projects, digitalization and also transport. And like it was said, now in the next period, we are trying to more find also synergies between these sectors, because now Connecting Europe facility, I think it has been too much sector specific in that way that it has been only funding transport project, digital projects or energy, but now because we want to have really modern facilities and modern infrastructure in Europe, it means that we have to find also more synergies. For example, it means if we think about transport and energy that we want to fund, for example, alternative fuels infrastructure. If we are looking the most important transport roads, we should have also alternative fuels there and the infrastructure, and it can be funded from here. Or then if we think about digitalization, it means that we are going to invest, for example, to 5G in the most important transport parts, that we have very good connections there, because we are, of course, getting prepared for the digitalization and automatization. And of course, it's always interesting that how much funding we can have for that. And like we heard that the Commission was proposing around 30 million to transport. But yes, in the Parliament we would like to increase the figures, and just in last week we were voting on that in our committees, and we are trying to go with the file to the next Strasbourg session, and then we would like to have the mandate to go to negotiations with the Council and Member States, because the Member States, they are supposed to make their decisions on next Monday on this CHEF Connecting Europe facility, and we are hoping that we could go to negotiations as soon as possible, because of course we would like to enter then finalize them before elections, and then we could have enough time to plan all the programs very well before it will start, so we don't want to have any delays with that. And really the new part in this Connecting Europe facility and in transport part, it's this military mobility. You might be familiar with it, and it was mentioned here, but really a little bit more than 6 billion is meant to use for military mobility, but it's really something, that kind of infrastructure, what will help also the civil use. So it's always the idea that it's dual use, so that we are making better infrastructure, civil infrastructure, and it can be used also for military purposes if needed, because now when we are speaking about the mobility of military between the different countries in Europe, we need to have also good railway connections and good maritime ports, and what can be used also for these purposes. But also this 6 billion, it will help all our transport in Europe, because we are investing it to our civil transport parts. And one of the important focuses will be, of course, the climate actions also in this program, and in fact 60% of all the funding is meant to use that kind of projects that we can decarbonize our transport. So it means that, of course, railways, they will be important part of this Connecting Europe facility. We know that we have the target that in the 2030, 30% of our freight transport should be on rail. And that's why we have to invest in railways in Europe, and also, of course, inline waterways. They are also important part on this decarbonization of inland waterways, or important part of decarbonization of our transport. But really the biggest idea behind this Connecting Europe facility is that we want to generate jobs, we want to boost our economic growth in Europe, and for that we need very good, high quality and modern transport infrastructure, digital infrastructure, and also energy infrastructure. And this Connecting Europe facility is focusing to really trans-European networks, so it means that there has to be cross-border dimension. And in the energy side, we have already trans-European energy networks. We have a list of them. And in transport side, we have trans-European transport networks, TEN-T, and the core corridors, to where we are going to focus in the next years. So I think this is an important part, how we are trying to complete our single market in Europe and make our economy and industry more competitive. But in the same time, of course, it has to be remembered that this Connecting Europe facility is really meant only for the projects which are not market-driven. So, of course, if there is market-based projects, they can't get funding from this. But, of course, in transport sector, we know that there is not many cases which are very market-driven, so this money is really needed to boost the investments. And of course we are also trying to use the different funding instruments, and we are trying to make it easier, because nowadays it's a little bit difficult also to combine different funding instruments, and we are trying to be more flexible also in that way in the future. So this may be from my side, and I just want to thank everyone for good cooperation, because I think we have had very good cooperation with the stakeholders during this process, and I hope it will continue also in next weeks when we are going to continue our negotiations with the Council.
Grazie onorevole.
Thank you, Ms. Virkkunen. And thanks for having wrapped up according to schedule in 10 minutes. I would like to give the floor to another member, Mr. Lavia, and he's going to tell us about the impact on companies.
aspetto del tutto diverso, non essendo...
I should like to focus on an aspect that is completely different. I'm not a part of the TRAN committee, but I'm a member of the ENVI committee, so Environment Committee. So mobility is something that, of course, is been discussed at length, but it is part and parcel of our climate action. And as you well know, following the partial failure of Kyoto, there was a very long process, decades and decades, and that brought us finally to COP21, where we finally came to a very big global agreement. 85% of emitting countries, 85% of emissions, more than 185 countries have signed on to this agreement. And I had the great privilege of being at the head of the EP delegation to COP21, and I was a rapporteur on the issue here in the European Parliament. And this was the biggest agreement ever reached in the world with very practical fallout. Now, then there's the drive legislation, and what we've had is that we really undertook big commitments within the European Union, and we have been active in the area industrially for many, many years. The industry in Europe obviously was very much affected by ETS, a system that didn't work very well at first, but then little by little was able to increase its pressure to lower emissions from industry. And then, of course, there's the aspect of mobility, which is more specific to what we're focusing on this morning. Mobility is something that we were able to look at via road transport, but also in terms of a combined transport. And the idea has always been, how can we reduce emissions? We worked very hard on this. A few scandals have emerged, as you know very well. Type approval and the emissions level have run into some problems because of scandals, which has meant that we have completely reviewed the way that we are looking at emissions. So rather than laboratory tests, real driving conditions tests, and we had a chance to negotiate with the council, and I can remember very well some of the things that emerged during all of that. And also, we completely reviewed all of the legislation on emissions. And it's clear that we're going to have to move from conventional transport on road to new systems that would be either integrated or fully rail. And that is going to be moving us in the right direction. Now, everyone who spoke before me had the chance to state that 25% of emissions come from transport. When it comes to road transport, we have made great efforts. We have entered into cooperation with stakeholders from the industry, for example, and rail transport as well. Great work has been done. When it comes to maritime transport, we're working with international organizations, meaning that we have made great strides to reduce emissions. But there has been great resistance from aviation, meaning that emissions continue to increase. And internationally, we haven't been able to enter into good international cooperation. We haven't seen a real will to reduce emissions within civil aviation. So that is a huge struggle that we're going to have to continue to work on. Now, when it comes to emissions, it seems to me that Europe has been spearheading things in the move to lower emissions. When it comes to the new regulation on air quality, for example, 400,000 die per year because of a lack of good air quality. And I think that that has really concentrated minds. Legislation has come forth over the course of recent years has really moved towards clearing up the pollution. So clean emissions and lightweight vehicles, legislation there too. The entire package on heavyweight vehicles as well that we just approved. And I think that that has been a decisive step forward, not just in terms of the targeting of the industrial system, but also really having an impact on everything related to fuels. At the most recent plenary, we approved technology neutrality for transport, meaning that we're going to, in a transitionary phase, towards new infrastructure, use new fuels. So lowering NOx emissions and CO2 emissions. So that is a good step forward. When it comes to fuels as well, we've seen some really good things emerging from sea, maritime, and LNG as a fuel, and updating the engine systems of the boats with new types of products that will be available for mid and short travel distances. So I think we are making some good steps forward there. So that short and mid-range distance. Now, some of the speakers that have spoken before me have mentioned that we need to make more investment. And I agree, yes, we do. But I think we have to clarify the point. We always need to look at the European budget in its whole. And I know that there are a lot of people who are listening to this directly from Italian. In 2019, the Italian budget in terms of commitment was 885 billion. And with 138 billion, we are actually hitting at all of the policies that need to be undertaken in the area of external action, environment, transport. 132 billion, actually. We're able to do much in Europe in all of these policy areas. And it's not always easy to get everything done with that amount. And after Brexit, we're going to have a drop in the budget because one of the net payers will be leaving, and a significant one at that. So we're going to have to obviously review our policy areas, because if we're not going to reduce what we hope will come out of those policies, well, clearly we're going to have to be able to do more with less, or cut certain areas if we're going to have a lower budget. If we're going to improve infrastructure, we're going to use some of the resource that comes from cohesion policy. And I'll give you a specific example. That's one of the things that we're really honing in on right now. Countries from north, countries from the east who are really pushing for that to take place. Now, if we make that cut, and it might be a nationally neutral budgetary measure, but for those countries where they're lagging slightly in terms of infrastructure when it comes to cohesion, and those regions that are lagging somewhat, well then nationally we always look at the central axes, and we usually take the funds away from the outer regions. With Metsola, usually we talk about how are we going to be able to strengthen Rome and Milan. And I say, well, from Palermo to Agrigento, it takes a very long time to travel to get those two regions linked up. At one point, I know there was someone here when we came out to inaugurate the fast train from Catania to Palermo. We had a great event, but it took 7 hours to get from two cities that are just 180 kilometers apart. So we have to find a way to take the resources and spread them about a little bit, because we can't consistently concentrate them on certain axes. No point in linking up all of those outermost areas if we haven't focused on the central axis. But if we're all in the same country, then we all need to have the same attention, because we're all on the same boat. So clearly we're going to need more resources, but we need to make sure that we are using those resources in the best way possible, so that if we're going to be able to achieve the policy that we want. We have asked in Parliament an increase of the member contribution to 1.3 of GNI for the upcoming MFF. That's what the Parliament has asked. The Commission stopped at 1.1, so they were slightly more conservative there, and the member states don't seem to want to shift at this point. it's going to be extremely difficult to approve all of these legislative packages that come through the parliament, while all of the resources available earmarked for those programs right now have a blank space next to them. So we're asking for more resources for the policies that we are supposed to be implementing. But when it comes to those legislative packages that are going through Parliament plenary right now, they don't even have an amount of money that is specifically earmarked for them. We're saying we need to do this, but we have no idea what money we're going to have available to do that. So obviously that is not a very simple undertaking. Just to conclude, and this is a more environmentally focused comment, I think that Europe is doing much, and it will continue to do much, because we have to be leaders like we've always been when it comes to issues related to fighting climate change. And this is one of the things that really will require innovation and boosting that innovation. This is going to give us a competitive advantage compared to other countries, those countries that do not believe in climate change, who have slowed investment in that direction. We are leaders. We want to be leaders. And I think that we have all of the conditions in place to have that competitive advantage compared to other countries around the world and other areas around the world. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you, Mr. Lavia. And since Mr. Lavia took a different tack, looked at what's really happening for companies, I'd really like to thank the speakers of this first round of discussion, and now would like to open the floor. Mario Dogliani is going to be the one to, do you want to stay at your seat, but you'll get the discussion going. Maybe you're better off up here.
L'ingegner Dogliani, che è direttore generale.
Mr. Dogliani is in charge of GS Mare here in Brussels, and he is going to speak on behalf of the 300,000 companies that are represented by GS Mare. So everything that's been discussed today will be replicated in the first copy of GS Mare, appropriately entitled Europe on the Move. And it's split up into the different areas. And it's really interesting because, as said, it gives you businesses' take on these developments, what the challenges and opportunities are. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to try to be brief. Let's have a look at the first slide here. So it's already been mentioned, GS Mare was born for businesses, especially SMEs seeking to gear up for the future. As mentioned by Rapporteur, digitalization, climate change, the association which supports us, the associations, which support us gathered here represent 350,000 operators and users of the transport system. The mobility packages, next slide please, foreshadow the transformation of the transport system. The destination we are moving towards to come to grips with, as was just mentioned by the honorable member, with climate change and digitalization, the two major challenges. So through events such as today, we want to address the question, what is the best route to reach that destination on time and ready to make the most of those challenges? So very briefly, we've discussed this with our associations, and what we'd like to share with you, what we believe are the milestones on this pathway to contribute to building our future. One is adaptation. That means, for instance, the association, when necessary, must provide missing pieces. There's Federazione Imprese and Confales, for instance, which are developing the logistic to supply alternative fuels where it doesn't yet make economic sense for companies to do so. So also adaptation when it comes to the role of associations, managing complexity is something that we're keen on. There's Casa Tigiani and Confirma seeking assistance to meet the need to adapt their networks of repair shops to ever more sophisticated, connected, and multi-fuel vehicles. And the second focus is on sharing know-how. So welcome to the digitalization of transport documents. Thank you. It would be best if, as you said, well, digitalization is an enormous opportunity, as you said, and we want to see to it that it will be possible to have shared systems, in particular for SMEs, to make the most of digitalization. The network of ports and inland freight terminals, that's been mentioned. And there too, we could make a better use of infrastructure, as was already mentioned. And additional services could be provided, not just for their logistical operations, but to host services for companies. For instance, when it comes to alternative fuels, digitalization, etc. So it's a matter of making the most of existing infrastructure. The non-uniform implementation, and I mean that's a reality, of community directives and interruptions resulting from local solutions are holding up change, just like obstacles on motorways hold up traffic. It's a matter of identifying and reporting them to diminish their impact. So last point is to cooperate, facilitate access to credit, innovation, high-tech, and access to services as well as training. It's all about collaborating with a view to providing integrated packages of flexible solutions in step with a rapidly evolving sector. This is what our associations believe is the right way forward to come to grips with the challenges ahead. Thank you.
Grazie, ingegnere.
Thank you very much for that presentation, for summing up your activities. That gave us a good overview of GS Mare as a foundation. And I now would like us to enter into a discussion. So the floor is as wide open as can be. So if you have any questions, comments, do go right ahead.
Magari indicare nome.
Maybe you could introduce yourselves very briefly.
Nessuna questione? Prego.
You have a question?
Sì, buongiorno a tutti.
Yes. Good afternoon. I'm Manuel Piccardi. I'm represent driving schools. And so far, you've talked about very important topics. You've done that in a very professional way, I dare say. And you represent the world of policymakers that's really doing what it can to change the world, to reduce emissions, and to make our roads safer and more. So based on my Italian background and my experience here in Europe, I deal with people and I see that there are obstacles impeding for people getting hold and using technology. Basically, what I have in mind is two kinds of users. first of all, young people. I mean, there's major obstacles when it comes to hybrid or electric vehicles being more popular, because you can't use these cars when you want to pass your driver's test. So, I mean, that, of course, is not very good. And also, we only can use conventional fuels. So there, too, we should be allowed to use different vehicles that are going to reduce emissions. And then another problem, and it's a major one, we live on a continent where we've got a given number of driving license that are practically 3/4 of which are over 25 years old. So, I mean, it's based on people using vehicles from way back when, different technologies. And I just wonder, is our society ready? I think, given the greater complexity of vehicles, there's got to be better training so that drivers know how to handle their vehicles when problems arise. And the issue of repair shops, of them being upgraded, was mentioned. And also it's a matter of the users being brought up to speed, because there's more automation in vehicles, and there's a real danger of people being unfit to manage their vehicles when they're driving.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we could take all of the questions and then answer them.
Buongiorno a tutti.
Good afternoon to one and all. Federico Manna, Confalis director, and I'm honored to be the director of Confalis. And our president sends his greetings. He wasn't able to be here, and he thanks you for the work that you're carrying out. Evelyn is here. You know that we are fully in line with the things that have been said. Mrs. Aiuto's statements were of keen interest to me, and I fully agree with the work that is being carried out when it comes to digitization. We believe that there should be more done to be even more decisive, because we don't want to leave it down to the member states to implement or not CNR electronic documents, because we won't be able to achieve anything, I think, when it comes to the governments taking initiative on that. However, if the European Union makes that mandatory, even to a certain extent, it will be much easier then to be able to meet that objective that we discussed previously. So just a comment on what has been said here this morning. Thank you.
Sì. Roberto
Tereno, I'm in charge of ASEBI. First of all, I'd like to suggest something, because often we complain about costs, and then when we take the train, we can see that back home things aren't that bad. Now, I just have a question for Mr. Lavia when it comes to air transport. And what about these new fuels that those that have a smaller environmental impact? Those are being in the use in Northern Europe, for instance. But there, as an organization, we have labor, and when it comes to, to get back to road transport, when it comes to cabotage, those who have to stay in Italy, they can't compete with those from other countries. And we know that 80% of those in driving a truck are foreigners. So how can we come to grips with the unfair competition that is part and parcel of our daily lives? Thank you.
Giancarlo
Carlotta, Vice President of a group that is works on repair of naval infrastructure. A question for the Ms. Aiuto. We should like to know how much maritime transport is covered by the package when it comes to intermodality, road, rail, but there's also intermodality, of course, that includes maritime and the maritime routes. Another question relates to using new fuels and the development thereof, LNG, for example, that clearly would have a role to play in terms of shipping emissions reductions, as well as reduction of road emissions. Italy is a platform, if you will, on the Mediterranean, and therefore it is going to be able to need to move things from the coast that will, so something that is going to be able to support the development of the use of gas for the maritime transport, as well as the subsequent transport throughout the roads in Italy.
Well, I'd like to tackle a number of questions because I'll even talk about LNG to share some info with you. Well, I'll start with Mr. Picardi's question about the possibility of using or not using electric vehicles in driving schools. Well, generally speaking, it is a matter of fostering the driving skills on as complicated a vehicle as possible. So I can understand that when it comes to the level of complexity, there's an issue in terms of coordination. So in any event, the emissions of the vehicles used in driving schools don't really amount to much as compared to overall emissions. You know, we have some pretty good targets for electric vehicles, and we'll see by 2030 whether we get there. But in any event, what we need is ongoing training. And I would make a distinction, and looking at those who have my hair color, who are pretty much my age, in the good old days, things were simpler when it came to getting hold of a driving license. So it was used for many things. I've got a driver's license that let me drive a motorbike, you name it. Now the complexity of these various vehicles has increased because you have a different driver's license on the basis of the size of your motorbike's engine. So if you can drive a car but not a truck, etc. So legislation has kept the pace with the complexity. I don't know whether, well, it might be a good idea to compare what's up within the 28 member countries, but I'm no expert when it comes to driver's licenses, just talking about my own experience. Now, when it comes to clean fuels, we're still at the stage of experimentation. But AITA, they've never acknowledged any need to make any efforts to reduce emissions. So we're not talking about targets even. So the things are getting worse. They're constantly increasing the number of passengers, the volume of freight, and it's just economics. That's the basis. They opt for engines that consume less fuel, but simply for economic rules. And when it comes to AITA, they really should get their act together, because we, of course, can enforce our legislation when you're talking about planes traveling from Europe to other continents. So it would make sense to apply our legislation to short-range flights when there's so much pollution being generated elsewhere in the world. So what we need is worldwide rules. Now, picking up on Coletta's question, when it comes to future developments in fuels, I think Italy has done a lot, because we are a country that has used gas. We're leaders there. We have a well-structured gas network that is pretty dense. But when it comes to liquefied gas, there it all comes through Marseille, so we import that, and it adds to the price. So over the past few years, we have made the headway. In Italy, there was the biomethane decree that was a big step forward. Biomethane, in fact, if I've got it right, maybe somebody can correct me if I've got it wrong, but Giuseppe Bastiglione, it was published in time to be implemented. At present, there's the major commitment, because the system really kicks in when there's a plant distributing the process. So yes, we can see that there's investment in gas nationally to see to it that we will have, as said, a dense compressed gas network. And there are ever more operations in terms of liquefied gas. Compressed and liquefied gas, they have to go together, because part of the liquid gives rise to gas that can be distributed in compressed form. So they have to be dealt with simultaneously. So this project for networks, well, it's one thing. Another thing is the road network. When it comes to getting trucks off the road, there's ever more heavy-duty vehicles running on LNG every day. They the fuel costs less, and the emissions are less, and it makes transporting goods cheaper. Now, when it comes to the maritime, there too, when it comes to the distribution possibilities and ports, we don't really have what we need. I think there's still room to, well, we still have a lot of work to do on that score. Thank you.
Allora io prima di dare
Before I give answers to the queries that were raised with me, I did want to welcome Fabio Massimo Castaldo, our colleague, but he's also the Vice President of the European Parliament and has just joined us to send his greetings to you. And he was invited, of course, to our conference and was very kind to accept and to attend. When it comes to the driver's license, the TRAN committee has looked at this, and specifically on fake licenses in the transport sector. We haven't looked specifically at the issue of time limits from when the driver's license was issued to how many years have gone by. We haven't looked at that specifically, but when we did look at fake driver's licenses, because unfortunately it is a problem, especially when it comes to road transport. So I'll try to understand better the question that you asked, and I can come back to you. We will remain in contact, and I hope to give you a fuller answer at a later date. When it comes to maritime transport, 2 years back, there was a package on this. And I was a rapporteur on this, on passenger safety in maritime transport. So that issue of maritime travel and transport has been addressed. When it comes to combined transport, of course, as I stated before, that will have an impact on maritime travel. Because we all know very well that the majority of freight that comes from outside of the EU comes via sea. Then they come to the main terminals that are ports, where that freight is then brought in. And this has to be, of course, managed. There needs to be a full strengthening of those terminals. And that's going to have an impact on the maritime sector. Not just in terms of navigation, per se, but the beginning and the end of the ship's transport. And so there are going to be some positive impacts in terms of that on the maritime transport aspect. When it comes to unfair competition, this is really the hardcore of what we have been trying to resolve, but that has actually led to stalled procedure. One of the directives of the 3 files is the posted workers aspect. What we are unable to find an agreement whether the driver have to return home after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, how many days they need to be stopped on the ground in their home state. To try to stop this unfair competition of those drivers coming from the east into other member states, and you can imagine which countries would be less likely to accept restrictive measures. You can understand that we're really in a situation of inability to make progress here. It's an impasse. So if we look at Italian companies, we have to understand, well, that there's France, Sweden, Germany, Spain, and a number of different countries that want to be able to protect their companies and be able to stave off this unfair competition. But of course, you have these countries from the east that have labor costs that are less expensive, and they would like to see their companies be able to develop using all of these positive factors that exist in this environment. Well, that has prevented us from coming to some sort of an agreement on the issue and actually being able to conclude the file. Then, when it comes to the fact that there's going to be some sort of a mandatory use of technologies, as I said previously, I had a courageous approach to this that was more ambitious than what we were able to achieve, and it ran into the very hard wall of reality. And I think technology is going to lead the way. We won't necessarily need to be driving it through policy. So there are some sectors that resist this and that have other interests that they are not necessarily able to fully explain. So we're trying to do the best we can, but we have to obviously juggle all of these competing interests and whatnot. So that what brings me to the conclusion, to my conclusion. Thank you, Ms. Aiuto, for these replies to the queries that were raised. I'd like to give the floor to Evelyn Zubin, who is the organizer of today's event. And I thank her for having come up with the event and organized it. And it comes down to her now to give the concluding remarks before we give the floor to Vice President Castaldo, who will give the closing remarks of this morning's proceedings. Thank you very much. I should like to begin by thanking everyone for being here this morning and for all of the panel members, the rapporteurs. It has been a very important event for us. So thank you very much to Mr. Mazzola and Ms. Aiuto. This is a very important event. I do believe that we are at a crossroads, at a time of great change. And the first to realize that this change was afoot was the Commission, who came up with these objectives and benchmarks that we should meet. At CS Mare, we have tried really hard to support SMEs with some concrete measures and really giving a business reasoning to all of it. An example, funds. Thanks to European funds, we have been able to put together new companies and support them. They were not competitive in transporting new fuels, for example, LNG. In the south of Italy, for example, to bring liquid methane was far too costly. Thank you to new types of instruments like digitization. We were able to actually bring LNG to the south of Italy. This was an enormous step forward. And thanks to these types of projects, we have also been able to come up with small pieces of infrastructure that have been built. And that is not just a minor issue. Now, having said all of that, it might sound easy, but actually these companies have run into enormous obstacles in trying to make this a reality. We have worked with them directly in terms of practical issues and helping them in their language skills and in establishing their system. Modestly, we've tried to come up with solutions that we would be able to put into place. Now, you've had a chance to address many of these, but sharing is a big thing. We need to be able to share information. We need to train people. We need to spread culture. We have to come up with a new mindset for the systems that we are using. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to establish this type of synergy that we need. And without synergy, the SMEs will never be able to meet the challenges of the objectives that have been set by the European Commission. And they will not be able to be competitive. So together, we will be able to achieve this, but only together. And then we run into this problem that sometimes we face in Italy. It's a problem that Italians struggle with at times, patience. Patience. Giving up a little bit of autonomy to come up with a new system.
The interpreters apologize. We've gone over by 15 minutes, but now we have to call it quits and head off to another meeting. Thanks for your understanding.
Oggi avete tutti relatori che hanno molta più competenza di me, quindi non credo che non devo dire altro sulle tematiche, sugli argomenti, ma lascio la parola all'onorevole Castaldo con una preghiera. Aiutateci e aiutate soprattutto le piccole e medie imprese a proseguire questo percorso, perché avete fatto un grande lavoro, ma che è ancora lontano da raggiungere l'obiettivo. La rotta l'avete ben disegnata, ora bisogna arrivarci. Vi ringrazio e ringrazio tutti voi.
Buongiorno a tutti, permettetemi in primis di rivolgere un caro saluto a tutti i colleghi presenti, ai relatori, ai nostri panelist di oggi, ma in particolare anche a voi che rappresentate ovviamente i principali stakeholders di questo comparto dei trasporti. Un ringraziamento particolare alla Fondazione CS Mare, al gruppo di Iniziativa Italiana e alla mia collega, ma anche cara amica Daniela, per questo invito e per condividere qualche breve spunto di riflessione dopo una giornata che è stata molto intensa e chiaramente ha visto relatori molto più competenti di me nell'ambito specifico. Noi stiamo affrontando, come è stato ricordato, un insieme di tematiche che sono di notevole importanza e anche di estrema attualità, sia per il nostro Paese che per quelle migliaia di imprese e piccole imprese, come veniva ricordato, che lavorano nel settore dei trasporti e della logistica. E quanto alla sensibilità nei confronti delle piccole e medie imprese, posso dire che essendo figlio di un piccolo imprenditore so bene per esperienza familiare cosa significa in termini ovviamente di sfide, vere e proprie sfide quotidiane da vincere, non soltanto per portare avanti il proprio business, ma anche per farlo appunto con la relativa tranquillità e sicurezza e certezza anche delle regole, che non è purtroppo nel nostro Paese sempre scontata. C'è consapevolezza quindi sia delle difficoltà che il settore sta affrontando negli ultimi anni rispetto all'evolversi del mercato, ma anche delle sfide che arrivano tanto dalla digitalizzazione, positive e negative, quanto da una globalizzazione che possiamo dire non sempre è stata gestita in modo efficace. Gli spostamenti dei passeggeri e il traffico delle merci stanno avvenendo sempre di più, come avete ricordato più volte, su distanze crescenti e su scala internazionale, e la competizione anche è diventata una competizione estremamente più aggressiva. Per quanto riguarda le nostre imprese in particolare, noi abbiamo già visto le conseguenze negative di norme europee che sono spesso di difficile implementazione, controlli farraginosi da parte delle autorità preposte e soprattutto, e molti di voi hanno insistito su questo punto, un continuamento del dumping sociale e salariale di pratiche irregolari da parte di altri Stati membri. Questo ha alterato ovviamente la libera concorrenza tra le società italiane e quelle provenienti da altri paesi dell'estero, in particolare dell'Est Europa, creando danni molto gravi al nostro comparto e creando una concorrenza sleale che è intollerabile. Su questo si palesa quindi un'Europa spaccata e non è l'unico campo in cui oggi noi abbiamo un'Europa spaccata. Se facciamo un'analisi, una fotografia un po' più ampia delle discussioni di questi ultimi anni, in particolare ci rendiamo conto che l'Europa, per semplificare, perché in realtà poi c'è una complessità ben più sviluppata, quantomeno è divisa in tre. Abbiamo un nord che non si intende con il sud sul piano economico, ma abbiamo anche un ovest e un est, quindi entrambi nord e sud, che non si intendono più con appunto con la parte orientale, con i paesi dell'allargamento dal 2004 in poi, su quello che deve essere anche l'architettura stessa dell'integrazione. E questo credo sia sotto gli occhi di tutti. Tornando però al tema oggetto della discussione, io mi domando e vi domando, ma quante imprese sono state costrette nel nostro Paese a chiudere le proprie attività, non potendo quindi competere con gli operatori stranieri che praticavano cabotaggi irregolari, come è stato ricordato? Quanti hanno dovuto delocalizzare per avere i costi di manodopera e tassazioni più basse per sopravvivere in questo mercato, come è stato detto? Di fronte quindi a questa competizione e a questo fenomeno crescente della delocalizzazione dobbiamo porre al centro del settore del trasporto il rispetto dei diritti e delle condizioni sociali dei lavoratori, creare basi e regole sempre più comuni e soprattutto di garanzia per l'intero continente, puntando a quelle condizioni eque e a quegli uguali trattamenti nell'erogazione di servizi in ogni Stato che dovrebbero essere il corollario del mercato unico che noi abbiamo creato e per il quale ci battiamo. Questa responsabilità di essere in prima linea contro il dumping sociale a ogni livello ricade ovviamente su noi legislatori. Ci stiamo battendo all'interno di questo Parlamento, Daniela lo sa bene perché ovviamente ne è stata una delle protagoniste nella sua commissione, nella commissione TRAN, per cercare di eliminare quelle distorsioni del mercato nei pacchetti di mobilità che sono attualmente in discussione. Ma questo è un compito, come è stato ricordato anche da chi mi ha preceduto prima, che si può vincere soltanto se si fa raccordo con il mondo delle imprese e se si fa sistema. Tante volte viene detto quasi come se fosse uno slogan, ma in realtà è che non è un problema di slogan e di comunicazione, è un problema di metodologia, è un problema di approccio ed è un problema di visione strategica. E da questo punto di vista noi dobbiamo trovare questo giusto bilanciamento per cercare come comparto italiano di essere competitivi, di non subire i danni che stiamo subendo e quindi è fondamentale lavorare anche per migliorare il settore della logistica e della multimodalità dei trasporti passeggeri e merci, un tema che so che è caro a molti di voi e che avete approcciato nelle discussioni di oggi. Bisogna partire dal presupposto che la normativa vigente oggi non favorisce adeguatamente quell'effettivo sviluppo di modalità per il trasporto combinato che noi più volte abbiamo auspicato come Parlamento. Pertanto dobbiamo migliorare il quadro legislativo, soprattutto in termini anche di incentivi e di investimenti su queste nuove infrastrutture che mirino appunto a colmare un vuoto e soprattutto prendere atto che sia il trasferimento di merci su rotaia che l'ottimizzazione della catena logistica possono e debbono anche portare notevoli vantaggi sia agli spostamenti su lunga percorrenza che alla decongestione di un traffico stradale e quindi il conseguente impatto dell'ambiente e sulla salute dei cittadini che ben conosciamo, soprattutto chi di noi ha la sventura di vivere nelle grandi metropoli e nei principali punti quindi di traffico e di congestionamento. Questa sfida quindi che noi dobbiamo affrontare è in primis quella dell'intermodalità, abbattere i costi per le imprese, ridurre tempi e distanze, abbattere l'impatto ambientale. Dobbiamo potenziare le piattaforme di interscambio, migliorare la capacità dei terminal e garantire soprattutto efficienza nei collegamenti, che questi vantaggi debbono e possono essere tangibili e possono migliorare la competitività del settore e i collegamenti tra le diverse località in Italia e in Europa se investiamo ovviamente un ammontare di risorse che sia proporzionale alla grandezza degli obiettivi che ci stiamo ponendo, e su questo poi magari farò qualche considerazione anche sul CEF. Ma non voglio trascurare anche l'importanza della digitalizzazione e dell'innovazione tecnologica, che hanno ovviamente un effetto orizzontale e trasversale su quasi tutti i settori di cui noi ci occupiamo dentro questo Parlamento. Ma nello specifico, ho avuto modo anche di discuterne con alcuni di voi, occupandomi come relatore della mobilità militare, che è un comparto molto specifico e molto settoriale, però da un certo punto di vista riprende e richiama alcuni principi comuni con il pacchetto intero, che è quello appunto del CEF. Sicuramente l'adozione dei sistemi interconnessi, lo scambio di dati in tempo reale sull'alta velocità in alta velocità e in sicurezza, e tutte queste prospettive che ci aprono le innovazioni tecnologiche ci potranno e ci possono già permettere di offrire dei servizi migliori ai consumatori, nonché una maggiore trasparenza nella catena logistica. Noi dobbiamo investirci tanto in Europa quanto in Italia come sistema paese, e anche lì raccordo tra realtà industriale e governo e raccordo tra Parlamento e quindi imprese è imprescindibile. Modernizzare e potenziare le infrastrutture della logistica e diminuire gli oneri burocratici a carico delle nostre imprese italiane, in questo caso, lo ribadisco, noi purtroppo abbiamo un gravissimo problema sulla burocrazia, ma non devo spiegarlo io a voi, lo sapete molto bene perché molti di voi lo vivono quotidianamente sulla loro pelle. Poi deve garantire la nostra competitività dentro il mercato europeo, al di fuori del mercato europeo. I trasporti e la logistica sono uno di quei volani che possono costituire ovviamente un rilancio fondamentale della nostra economia e, come è stato ricordato anche prima, possono valorizzare la posizione strategica che noi abbiamo all'interno del Mediterraneo e aprirci a nuovi mercati e a nuove rotte. Diceva Napoleone qualche secolo fa che è la geografia a fare la politica degli Stati. Io sono perfettamente d'accordo con questa considerazione. Noi dobbiamo, per natura, per storia e per posizione, ambire a essere l'hub del Mediterraneo, la porta verso il Nord Africa e il Medio Oriente del nostro continente. È per questo che negli investimenti europei di questo prossimo bilancio pluriennale, quello 2021-2027, noi dobbiamo combattere affinché ci sia un effettivo accesso delle imprese italiane, possano farne un uso ingente e proficuo, tanto a livello locale tramite i fondi e gestione condivisa del FESR per lo sviluppo regionale, e si faccia anche maggiore sistema tra le varie regioni, che spesso sono un piccolo mondo a sé stante, ognuno cerca di coltivare una sua visione legata alla peculiarità e al voler magari coltivare il famoso interesse dell'orticello senza pensare a una pianificazione strategica sul piano nazionale, quindi facendoci anche una concorrenza che ha poco senso a livello locale, ma soprattutto poi anche a livello dell'Unione. E qui ovviamente entrano in gioco Horizon Europe, il meccanismo per collegare l'Europa, appunto il CEF, di cui stavamo già parlando prima. Riguardo al CEF, come vi ricordavo prima, ho avuto modo l'onore di essere relatore per la Commissione Difesa, quindi il mio è stato un approccio ovviamente più legato ai termini della sicurezza, ma lì ho insistito fortemente, in primis, per ricordare che le infrastrutture raramente sono esclusivamente militari. Nella stragrande maggioranza dei casi sono e devono essere concepite come dual use. E ho ribadito anche che uno standard militare ha il beneficio, se viene concepito in modo intelligente, di alzare la sicurezza anche dello standard civile. Perché è ovvio che se costruisco un'infrastruttura per farci passare un convoglio di carri armati da 70 tonnellate a carro armato, automaticamente vuol dire che sarà totalmente a prova di sollecitazioni ben superiori a quelle del traffico normale. Questa nuova window del CEF deve essere costruita in modo che benefici l'intero continente. Lì devo purtroppo denunciare, ma ne abbiamo parlato anche con i colleghi l'altro giorno in riunione tra tutti i vari schieramenti politici, i tentativi di alcuni di strumentalizzarlo, di farne una mancetta per colmare qualche taglio alle politiche di coesione, di rivolgere lo sguardo esclusivamente ad est, quindi parlare esclusivamente di un asse ovest-est con appunto come direi giustificazione per alcuni, pretesto per me e per altri, le tensioni appunto con la Russia e con il vicinato orientale. Bene, se parliamo di stabilità, di rischi e di tensioni, ne abbiamo tantissime e sicuramente non classificabili come meno rischiose e importanti sul fianco sud. Questo fianco mediterraneo che viene quasi sempre dimenticato, tranne che da noi per le battaglie che cerchiamo di portare avanti trasversalmente in modo condiviso. Quindi non possiamo limitarci e non possiamo permettere che alcuni si limitino a guardare esclusivamente ai Balcani o esclusivamente all'Europa orientale. C'è un Mediterraneo che ha sete di centralità, che ha sete di intermodalità, che ha sete di essere un pilastro portante dell'architettura dell'Unione Europea del domani. Concludo quindi dicendo che nonostante l'opinione diversa dei relatori principali del CEF, che hanno stralciato la posizione quasi unanime che avevo ottenuto nella Commissione Difesa per avere un bilanciamento geografico obbligatorio dal punto di vista normativo, continueremo a insistere su questa battaglia e su questo sono contento di dire che ho visto un'ampia convergenza su questa posizione che ho espresso da parte di tutte le varie forze politiche. E questo ci riporta al tema di prima. L'Italia vince quando fa sistema, quando è capace di mettere tutta la sua pressione, le sue competenze, il suo enorme patrimonio di conoscenze e anche di savoir-faire, permettetemi di dirlo, al servizio dell'interesse nazionale. Questo dialogo che avete creato oggi bisogna portarlo avanti, bisogna insistere affinché questa sinergia con le imprese, con le piccole e medie imprese, abbia quindi un impatto importante sulla legislazione dell'Europa del domani che stiamo discutendo, affinché la nostra voce sia ascoltata e da questo punto di vista sicuramente dai presenti, ma in generale da molti di noi, troverete sempre delle orecchie attente, delle orecchie assolutamente pronte a costruire insieme queste posizioni, delle orecchie che finalmente facciano l'interesse del nostro Paese che, come dico sempre, non ha etichette e non dovrebbe avere appunto colori. Qua dentro specialmente gli unici colori dovrebbero essere il tricolore della nostra Repubblica. Vi ringrazio di vero cuore per l'invito e per queste riflessioni che ho potuto condividere con voi.
Grazie Vicepresidente per questa chiusura e per aver tratto le considerazioni finali. Siamo giunti quindi veramente alle conclusioni, manca soltanto il cocktail che sicuramente alcuni di voi aspettavano con impazienza. E non prima però di avervi ricordato un'ultima volta che la pubblicazione Europe on the Move di CS Mare è disponibile anche non soltanto sui tavoli predisposti all'entrata, ma anche in formato elettronico PDF sul sito web di CS Mare. Dato che il Vicepresidente Castaldo parlava di proseguire questo dialogo e di renderlo permanente e continuo, regolare, potete fare riferimento su Simona Costa e sull'ingegner Dogliani dell'ufficio di rappresentanza di CS Mare per inviare successivi ulteriori spunti, contributi e follow-up. E potete seguire proprio Simona, Andrea e le altre persone della segreteria organizzativa